My name is Evelyn Wilson, and at 67 I thought I knew exactly what my life would be. A widow living in a house too big for one person in Colorado, with walls that hold more memories than I sometimes think I can bear. 8 years ago, my husband Richard passed away unexpectedly. A heart attack, they said, as if giving it a name made the absence any easier. It wasn't supposed to end that way. We had plans, Richard and I. We were going to travel more once he retired, revisit the places we'd seen when we were young and discover new ones. Europe at Christmas was at the top of our list. "The snow falls differently there, Evie," he used to say, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they did when he was particularly excited about something. It's like each flake knows exactly where it belongs. After he died, our 2-story colonial house became a museum of what used to be. I kept everything just as it was, his reading glasses still resting on the nightstand, his favorite sweater draped over the chair in our bedroom. Maybe it was my way of pretending he had just stepped out and would be back any minute. Grief makes fools of us all, I suppose. But life, as it always does, found ways to pull me forward. My son Mark and his wife Hannah became my anchors. Mark, with Richard's gentle eyes and my stubborn chin, would visit every Sunday. Hannah would bring home-cooked meals and fresh flowers. Their children, my precious grandchildren Emma and Liam, would fill the house with the kind of noise that makes emptiness retreat, if only temporarily. And then there was Christmas, my favorite time of year. For 7 years after Richard's passing, I'd spend it at Mark and Hannah's home. I'd arrive early in the morning with my famous pecan pie, the recipe passed down from my grandmother. I'd help Hannah string lights while Mark assembled whatever toy had been deemed essential that year. We'd share stories, laughter, and sometimes, when the children were asleep, tears for the one who wasn't there. It wasn't the life Richard and I had planned, but it was still a life filled with love. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. The Sunday visits became bi-weekly, then monthly. Hannah's phone calls grew shorter, her voice carrying that polite distance that Southern women like myself recognize immediately, the kind that says I'm doing this out of obligation. Mark started mentioning work more, vacations less. The invitations to school recitals and soccer games dwindled. Still, Christmas remained our constant. Every December 25th, I belonged somewhere. Until this year. The first hint came in September when I called to ask about Thanksgiving plans. "Oh, Mom," Mark had said, his voice carrying that slight hesitation I'd come to dread. "Hannah's sister is hosting this year, in Phoenix. It's a bit far for you to travel." I agreed, of course. What else could I do? I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time since Richard died, eating a store-bought turkey dinner and watching old movies. It was fine, I told myself. Families grow, change, make new traditions. Christmas would be different. Christmas was ours. I started decorating early that year, putting up the tree the day after Thanksgiving, hanging the ornaments Richard and I had collected over 40 years of marriage. Each one carried a story: the ceramic angel from our honeymoon, the hand-painted bulbs the children had made, the delicate glass star Richard had given me our last Christmas together. "For my North Star," he had written on the small card, "who always guides me home." I baked cookies no one would eat, wrapped presents with careful corners and satin bows, and told myself that soon the house would be filled with the sounds of family again. I even bought new Christmas stockings, red velvet with white trim, to hang beside the fireplace. One for each of us, including Richard. Some traditions are too precious to let go. As December progressed, I noticed Mark hadn't mentioned Christmas plans yet. Typically by mid-month, we would have discussed menus, gift exchanges, what time I should arrive. But this year, silence. Still, I didn't want to be the kind of mother who made her children feel guilty. So I waited, telling myself they were just busy. But as the days passed and the silence continued, a small, insistent worry began to gnaw at me. I found myself checking my phone more often, making sure the ringer was turned up, that I hadn't missed any calls. I scrolled through old text messages, looking for clues I might have missed. Had I said something wrong? Done something to offend? The lights on my Christmas tree seemed dimmer somehow, the ornaments less bright. By December 18th, I couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number, my heart racing like a schoolgirl's. He didn't answer, so I called Hannah instead. "Hello, Evelyn," she answered, her voice carrying that practiced politeness that never quite reaches the eyes. "Hello, dear," I said, matching her tone while gripping the phone a little tighter. "I was just calling to check about Christmas plans. I wanted to make sure I bring everything you need." There was a pause, just long enough to know what was coming would hurt. "About Christmas," Hannah said, her voice even more carefully modulated than usual. "We've decided to do something different this year. We're spending Christmas at my mom's house in Denver. It'll be easier for everyone." I waited for the rest, for the invitation that would surely follow. Hannah's mother, Margaret, lived just an hour away from me. Surely they would want me to join them. "You can stay home and relax this year," Hannah continued, as if offering me a gift rather than exclusion. "I know how tiring the holidays can be at your age." At my age, I was 67, not 97. I still did water aerobics twice a week at the community center. I volunteered at the local library. I had even started learning Spanish online. But all I said was, "Oh, I see. It's just easier this way," Hannah added, filling the uncomfortable silence. "Mom's house is closer to the children's cousins, and you know how they love playing together." I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. "Of course. That makes perfect sense." "Great. I'm glad you understand," Hannah said, relief evident in her voice. "I should go now. We're still packing." "Of course, dear. Merry Christmas to everyone," I managed to say before she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand, staring at the snow falling outside my window. The world continued turning while mine had suddenly stopped. I placed the phone carefully on the counter, as if any sudden movement might shatter me completely. The house had never felt so empty, so silent. I walked slowly into the living room, looking at the decorations that now seemed to mock me. The stockings hung limply, the tree stood sentinel over wrapped presents that might never be opened, and the scent of cinnamon and pine that had always meant family now only emphasized its absence. I sat down on the sofa, the same spot where Richard and I used to cuddle on Christmas Eve, watching the lights twinkle and planning our future, a future that never came. "You can stay home," Hannah had said, as if home was still home without the people who make it so. I'm not sure how long I sat there, watching the snow accumulate outside, each flake a tiny reminder of solitude. Minutes or hours, time seemed suspended in the quiet grief of rejection. The phone rang once, startling me from my reverie. It was Mark. "Mom," he began, his voice carrying that gentle tone he reserved for difficult conversations. "I wanted to check on you. Hannah said she spoke with you about Christmas." "Yes, she did." I kept my voice steady, determined not to make him feel guilty. Mothers protect their children, even from their own pain. "It's just that Carol's house is bigger, and the cousins are there, and—" "You don't have to explain, Mark," I interrupted softly. "I understand." "Are you upset? Because if you are—" "I'm fine," I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. "It makes perfect sense. You should be with Hannah's family this year." "It's just one Christmas, Mom," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We'll see you after New Year's, okay? Maybe have a late celebration." "That would be lovely," I said, though we both knew it probably wouldn't happen. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." After hanging up, I moved to the window, watching the neighborhood children building snowmen in their front yards. Their laughter drifted through the glass, a sound so at odds with the silence inside. Families walked together, carrying shopping bags or pulling sleds. Lights twinkled in windows. Life continued all around me while I stood still, suddenly an outsider to the season I had always loved. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and curled up in Richard's old armchair, the one I usually avoided because it made his absence too acute. I pulled out our photo albums, dusty from neglect, and began turning pages slowly. There we were, young and in love, standing before our first Christmas tree in a tiny apartment. There was Mark as a baby, clutching a new teddy bear. There were holiday dinners, ski trips, beach vacations, a lifetime captured in fading photographs. I lingered over our wedding photo, Richard handsome in his suit, me in my mother's restored wedding dress, both of us looking at each other as if no one else existed. We had been so young, so certain that love was enough. "What would you tell me now, Richard?" I whispered to his smiling image. "What do I do when I'm not wanted?" The photo offered no answers, just the frozen smile of a man who had promised never to leave me alone. I closed the album and wiped away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "It's just one Christmas," I told myself, echoing Mark's words. "It's fine." But deep down, it wasn't fine. It wasn't just about being alone for a day. It was about being forgotten, set aside, deemed unnecessary to the celebration of a holiday that was supposed to be about togetherness and love. In the days that followed, I moved through my house like a ghost, going through the motions of living. I watered the plants, checked the mail, made meals I barely tasted. I wrapped a few more presents for the grandchildren, writing careful notes they might never read. I replied to Christmas cards from friends with cheery messages that belied the hollow feeling in my chest. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering all the Christmases past and wondering if this was my future now. Polite exclusion in empty rooms. The thought was almost unbearable. 5 days before Christmas, I received a box from Mark and Hannah. Inside were presents for me to open on Christmas Day and a card signed by everyone, including the children. The gesture, meant to be kind, only underscored my isolation. They had packaged me away as neatly as the gifts, a problem solved with pretty paper and a bow. That night, as snow fell heavy outside my window, I made a decision. I would not spend Christmas Day sitting alone in this house, surrounded by memories and unopened gifts. I would not wallow in self-pity or anger. I would find another way. I just wasn't sure what that way would be. The idea came 3 days before Christmas, as unexpected and startling as a bird flying into a closed window. I had been in the attic, searching for an old ornament Richard had loved, a small wooden train his father had carved for him as a child. I wasn't sure why I wanted it now, after keeping it boxed away for years, but something about this Christmas made me want to surround myself with tangible pieces of the past. The attic was cold despite the house's heating, and dust motes danced in the weak winter light coming through the small window. Boxes were stacked neatly. Richard had always been meticulous about labeling everything, and I moved carefully through the narrow pathways between them. That's when I saw it, pushed against the far wall. Our old suitcase. Not the practical rolling luggage we'd bought in later years, but the vintage leather one Richard had inherited from his father. It was the suitcase we'd taken on our one and only trip to Europe 35 years ago. I moved toward it slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. My hands trembled slightly as I unlatched it, the familiar click unlocking more than just the case. Inside, I found exactly what I had known would be there. Richard's old travel journal, maps with routes marked in his precise handwriting, train ticket stubs, and a small lavender sachet now faded and without scent. And there, tucked into the journal's front pocket, was the photograph. Richard and me standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, snow falling gently around us. December 1989, our 10-year anniversary trip. The only time we'd managed to get away just the two of us since Mark was born. I traced the outline of Richard's face in the photo, remembering that day as clearly as if it had been yesterday. How the cold had turned our cheeks pink. How Richard had insisted on buying roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. How we'd kissed as the tower's lights came on at dusk. "We'll come back for Christmas someday," he had promised as we stood on the Pont des Arts, overlooking the Seine. "When Mark is grown, we'll see Vienna and the Christmas markets in Germany. We'll dance in the snow in Switzerland." It was a promise life had never allowed us to keep. Mark's education, Richard's career, my mother's illness, then grandchildren, and finally, Richard's heart giving out decades too soon. There had always been reasons to postpone that second European adventure. I sat on the dusty attic floor, holding the photograph, and felt something shift inside me. Not grief, which had been my constant companion for 8 years, but something sharper, more insistent. Regret. Regret for all the trips we'd never taken, all the promises we'd made to someday that never came. Regret that I had spent 8 years waiting for others to include me in their lives rather than creating a life of my own. I tucked the photograph into my sweater pocket and closed the suitcase, but I couldn't close away the feelings it had unleashed. All evening, as I moved through my quiet house, the idea followed me like a persistent shadow. It was ridiculous, impractical, probably even foolish. I was 67 years old. I had never traveled alone. What was I thinking? But the thought wouldn't leave me. That night I dreamed of Richard. We were walking through a Christmas market, snowflakes melting in his dark hair, his laugh echoing in the crisp air. He turned to me, his eyes bright with the joy I remembered so well. "What are you waiting for, Evie?" he asked. "Life isn't a spectator sport." I woke with tears on my cheeks and his words echoing in my mind. Outside, snow was falling heavily, coating the world in pristine white. I got out of bed and went to the window, watching the transformation of the familiar landscape into something new and beautiful. What was I waiting for? Permission? An invitation? Both had been explicitly denied. The thought of traveling alone terrified me. I had always been the cautious one in our marriage, the planner, the worrier. Richard had been the adventurer, pushing us to try new things, go new places. Without him, I had retreated into the safety of routine and familiarity. But what had that safety gotten me? A beautiful house that felt like a mausoleum. A family that saw me as an obligation rather than a joy. A life half lived. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the snow and wrestling with my thoughts. What would people think if I just left? Would Mark be worried? Would Hannah be relieved? Did it matter? The questions circled like wolves, each one threatening to devour my newfound courage. I was too old, too set in my ways, too afraid. But beneath the fear was something else, something that felt surprisingly like anger. Not the hot, consuming anger of youth, but a slow-burning ember of indignation. Why should I sit alone in this house because it was easier for everyone? Why should my happiness be secondary to convenience? I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. For Richard, for Mark, for the family we had created together. I had given up my career as a librarian to raise our son. I had moved 3 times for Richard's job. I had nursed my mother through cancer and my husband through heart disease. I had been the good wife, the good mother, the good widow, and now I was expected to be the good forgotten woman, accepting exclusion with a smile. "No," I said aloud, my voice startling in the quiet kitchen. Not this time. But the fear remained, coiled tight around my heart. What if I got lost? What if I got sick? What if something happened to me alone in a foreign country? I picked up my phone, staring at the blank screen. I could call Mark right now, tell him how hurt I was, ask to be included. He would feel guilty. Hannah would be put in an awkward position. Christmas would be strained, with everyone walking on eggshells around the selfish old woman who couldn't understand that families evolve. No, that wasn't the answer. I set the phone down and walked to the living room, where the Christmas tree stood in silent witness to my struggle. The ornaments caught the morning light, sending prisms of color across the walls. Among them was the glass star Richard had given me, my North Star. In that moment, I heard his voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "The snow falls differently there, Evie. Like each flake knows exactly where it belongs." Maybe it was time I figured out where I belonged too. The decision, once made, brought with it an exhilarating sense of freedom. I sat down at my computer, heart racing like a teenager planning an escape, and typed Christmas Tours Europe into the search bar. Dozens of options appeared, each promising magical experiences in snow-covered villages and historic cities. Most were already booked. It was, after all, only 3 days before Christmas. But one caught my eye. Christmas in the heart of Europe. Munich, Salzburg, Vienna, and Swiss Alps. It was a 10-day tour starting on December 23rd, designed specifically for senior travelers. There was one spot left. The price made me wince. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it. Richard's life insurance and our careful saving had left me financially comfortable, but decades of frugality made such an indulgence feel almost sinful. Then again, what was I saving for? Another silent Christmas? Another year of waiting for invitations that might never come? My cursor hovered over the Book Now button as doubt crept back in. Was I being impulsive? Reactive? Would I regret this when the credit card bill came in January? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and clicked. The confirmation email arrived moments later, along with a flurry of information about what to pack, weather forecasts, and meeting instructions. I was to be at Denver International Airport by 6 a.m. on December 23rd for a flight to Munich. I had less than 48 hours to prepare. The next day passed in a blur of activity. I dug out my passport, relieved to find it hadn't yet expired. I pulled clothes from the back of my closet, the good winter coat I rarely needed in Colorado, scarves, gloves, boots. I made lists, checked them twice, and tried to remember everything Richard used to pack for our trips. I debated telling Mark about my plans, but decided against it. Not out of spite or secrecy, but because I wanted this decision to be entirely mine. No explanations, no justifications, no chance for anyone to talk me out of it. For once, I would act without considering everyone else first. The morning of December 23rd arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a sky still dark with night. I called a taxi, locked up the house, and left a single light burning in the living room, the Christmas tree visible from the street. If anyone drove by, they would think I was home, sitting quietly by the fire like a good widow should. The thought made me smile as the taxi pulled away, carrying me towards something entirely new. Denver International Airport was already bustling despite the early hour. Christmas travelers hurried in all directions, loaded with gifts and pulling children sleepy with excitement. I checked in at the airline counter, handed over my suitcase, not Richard's old one, which was too fragile for modern travel, but a sturdy rolling case I'd bought years ago for visits to Mark. "Business or pleasure?" the young woman at the counter asked as she checked my passport. "Pleasure," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. When was the last time I had done something purely for pleasure? As I waited at the gate, I watched families around me, parents juggling coffee cups and children's backpacks, couples leaning into each other sleepily, elderly pairs holding hands. For a moment, the old loneliness threatened to return. Then I reminded myself that I was choosing this journey, choosing to step out of the shadows of what had been lost and into the light of what might still be found. The flight was long, nearly 11 hours with a brief stopover. I sat by the window, watching America disappear beneath a blanket of clouds, then the vast expanse of the Atlantic sliding away beneath the wings. I thought of the early explorers, how terrifying it must have been to sail into the unknown without certainty of what lay beyond. My adventure was small in comparison, but it felt monumental to me. The man beside me was engrossed in his laptop, for which I was grateful. I wasn't ready for conversation, for the inevitable questions about why a woman my age was traveling alone at Christmas. Instead, I read the guidebook provided by the tour company, studied the itinerary, and tried to imagine myself in these places I had only seen in photographs and films. As the plane began its descent into Munich, darkness had already fallen over Europe. Looking out the window, I could see the city spread below, a tapestry of lights against the night. Christmas lights twinkled along streets and squares, and a light snow was falling just as Richard had described. "The snow falls differently there," I whispered to myself, pressing a hand against the cold window as if I could reach through and touch those delicate flakes. When we landed, a curious thing happened. The weariness of the long flight, the lingering doubt, the fear that had dogged my decision, all of it seemed to fall away as I stepped onto European soil. In its place was a sense of lightness, of possibility, that I hadn't felt in years. I followed the signs to baggage claim, moving with the flow of passengers through the efficient German airport. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going, moving with purpose and direction. I tried to project the same confidence, though my heart was racing with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. What if no one from the tour was there to meet me? What if there had been some mistake with my booking? What if... Evelyn Wilson? A woman about my age was standing near the exit, holding a small sign with my name. She wore a red scarf and a friendly smile. Yes, that's me, I said, relief washing over me. Welcome to Munich. I'm Patricia, one of your tour guides. She shook my hand warmly. The rest of the group is already at the hotel. You're the last to arrive, but we've timed it perfectly. There's just enough time for you to freshen up before dinner. As we walked to the waiting van, Patricia chattering about the weather and the Christmas markets we would visit tomorrow, I felt something shift inside me. The final piece of doubt dissolved, replaced by a quiet certainty that I had made the right choice. In the van, driving through the snow-covered streets of Munich, I took out my phone and saw several missed calls from Mark. He must have stopped by the house and found it empty. For a moment, guilt tugged at me. Then I remembered Hannah's words. You can stay home. Well, I had stayed home, just not the home they expected. I put the phone away without returning the calls. Tomorrow would be soon enough to let them know I was safe. Tonight belonged to me alone, the first night of my new beginning. The hotel was a charming building in the old part of the city, decorated for Christmas with pine garlands and red ribbons. Inside, a massive tree dominated the lobby, adorned with traditional German ornaments and real candles carefully placed among the branches. Your room is ready, the receptionist said in accented English. The group will meet for dinner in the restaurant at 7 o'clock. My room was small but cozy, with a view of a snow-covered courtyard. I unpacked quickly, showered away the travel fatigue, and dressed for dinner in a sweater I hadn't worn in years, a deep blue cashmere that Richard had always loved. As I applied a touch of lipstick, another forgotten habit, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow, her eyes brighter, her posture straighter. Is this what choosing yourself does? I wondered. Does it change not just your circumstances, but your very self? At precisely 7, I made my way downstairs to the restaurant. A group of about 20 people, most around my age, were already gathered there. Patricia waved me over. Everyone, this is Evelyn, our final group member, she announced. Evelyn, welcome to our Christmas in Europe family. Family. The word caught me off guard, bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. I blinked them away quickly and smiled at the friendly faces turned toward me. Thank you, I said. I'm very happy to be here. As I took my seat at the long table, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes moved to make room for me. First time in Germany? He asked, his voice a pleasant baritone with a slight southern accent. First time in a long time, I replied. My husband and I came to Europe years ago, but we never made it to Germany. Traveling alone this time? His question was gentle, curious rather than pitying. Yes, I said, surprised at how easy it was to admit. My husband passed away 8 years ago. This is my first solo adventure. Well then, he said, raising his water glass in a small toast. Here's to new adventures, Evelyn. I'm Daniel Morgan, by the way. Widower, retired history professor, and fellow solo adventurer. As we clinked glasses, I felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years. Not quite excitement, not quite nervousness, but something warm and unexpected, like finding a forgotten treasure in the back of a drawer. To new adventures, I echoed, taking a sip of water and hiding my smile behind the glass. Outside, snow continued to fall on Munich, each flake finding its perfect place in the winter landscape. Inside, surrounded by strangers who would become companions, I felt something settle in my soul, a quiet certainty that I, too, was exactly where I belonged. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the soft sounds of a foreign city, I didn't feel alone. For the first time in years, I felt like Evelyn again, not just Richard's widow or Mark's mother, but a woman with her own story still unfolding. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another call from Mark. This time, I picked up. Mom? Where are you? I've been calling for hours. His voice was tight with worry and something else. Indignation, perhaps. I'm in Munich, I said simply. Germany. The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had dropped. You're where? He finally managed. Munich. I'm on a Christmas tour of Europe. Something I've always wanted to do. But why didn't you tell us? We were worried sick. I went by the house and you were gone. No note, nothing. I could have reminded him that he hadn't been worried about me spending Christmas alone, but I chose a different path. I'm sorry I worried you, Mark. It was a last-minute decision. I should have left a note. A last-minute decision to go to Europe? Alone? Mom, that's not like you at all. I smiled in the darkness. Maybe it's time for me to be more like me and less like what everyone expects. He was silent again, processing this new version of his predictable mother. Is this because of Christmas at Hannah's mom's? Because if you were upset— I'm not upset, Mark, I interrupted gently. I'm actually happier than I've been in a long time. I'm about to experience my first European Christmas, just like your father and I always talked about. But you're all alone. No, I said, thinking of the warm welcome I'd received, of Daniel's kind eyes across the dinner table, of the adventure unfolding before me. I'm not alone at all. I'm exactly where I need to be. After we hung up, I lay awake for a while, marveling at the strange turns life can take. 3 days ago, I had been a forgotten woman, set aside for convenience. Now I was an explorer, a traveler, the author of my own story. Richard would have been proud. And somewhere deep in my heart, I knew he was. Morning arrived in Munich with sunshine glinting off fresh snow. The world outside my hotel window transformed into a winter wonderland. I watched people hurry along the narrow street below, their breath visible in the crisp air. How strange to think that yesterday I had been in Colorado, alone with my doubts, and today I was here, an ocean away from the life I had known. My phone had buzzed several times during the night with messages from Mark and, surprisingly, Hannah. I read them over coffee, guilt mingling with stubborn pride. Mark's messages progressed from worried to confused to somewhat angry. Hannah's single text was more measured. We were concerned. Please let us know you're safe. Enjoy your trip. I responded with a simple message and a photo of the Munich skyline. Safe and happy in Germany. We'll call soon. After breakfast, our tour group gathered in the lobby. There were 18 of us all together, mostly couples with a few solo travelers like myself. Patricia, our guide, outlined the day's activities, a walking tour of Munich's historic center followed by visits to 2 Christmas markets. As we prepared to leave, Daniel Morgan appeared at my side, buttoning up a well-worn leather jacket. "Sleep well?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "Better than I have in months," I admitted, though I'm still not sure this is real. He chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to fit perfectly with the holiday atmosphere. "Oh, it's real all right, and it only gets better from here." He offered his arm in an old-fashioned gesture. "Shall we?" I hesitated only briefly before taking it, surprising myself with how natural the simple contact felt. As we explored Munich that day, I learned more about Daniel. He was 70, a widower for 5 years since losing his wife Elizabeth to cancer. He had taught European history at Vanderbilt University for 35 years before retiring. He had 2 grown daughters and 4 grandchildren, all living in Colorado, which explained what a Tennessee professor was doing on our tour. "I moved to Fort Collins last year to be closer to them," he explained as we wandered through the Marienplatz, where the Gothic Newtown Hall towered above us. "But I still love to travel when I can. Elizabeth and I used to spend every Christmas somewhere different." "And now?" I asked. His smile was tinged with familiar grief. "Now I'm trying to honor her by continuing the adventures we loved. This is my 3rd Christmas trip since she passed." I nodded, understanding completely. Richard and I always planned to see Europe at Christmas, but we never made it. Life got in the way. "And then life changes in ways we never expect," Daniel said softly. We stood silent for a moment, 2 strangers connected by the invisible thread of shared loss. The glockenspiel began its show, mechanical figures dancing their centuries-old routine as bells chimed above. I watched, enchanted, feeling a childlike wonder that had been absent from my life for too long. When I glanced at Daniel, I found him watching me rather than the clock. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, he said, looking away with a slight smile. It's just nice to see someone experiencing this for the first time. Later, as our group wandered through the Christkindl-markt, Munich's oldest Christmas market, I found myself thinking of Richard constantly, how he would have loved the handcrafted ornaments, how he would have insisted on trying every variety of sausage, how he would have bought mulled wine for us both. But the memories weren't painful as they so often were at home. Here they felt like companions, enriching the experience rather than diminishing it. Daniel stayed near me throughout the day, never intrusive but always present. By the time we returned to the hotel that evening, something had shifted between us. We weren't just two solo travelers who happened to be seated together at dinner. We had chosen to spend the day in each other's company, finding comfort and pleasure in shared observations and quiet conversations. After dinner, as the group dispersed to their rooms, Daniel asked if I'd like to take a short walk to see the square lit up at night. Despite the fatigue of jet lag, I found myself saying yes. The night was cold, but still, the earlier snow now a glittering carpet beneath street lamps. We walked slowly, our breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "I'm glad you decided to join the tour," Daniel said as we paused to admire the Christmas tree, now transformed by thousands of tiny lights. "It can't have been an easy decision to make." Actually, once I decided, it felt like the easiest decision I've made in years, like something inside me had been waiting for the chance. He nodded as if this made perfect sense. The hardest part of grief isn't the pain. It's figuring out who you are afterward. The person you were with them is gone too, in a way. His words resonated so deeply that I had to take a steadying breath. "Yes," I whispered. "Exactly that." As we walked back to the hotel, I found myself thinking about expectations, how they can blind us to possibilities, how they can limit what we allow ourselves to experience. I had expected to spend Christmas alone, forgotten. Instead, I was walking through a snowy German square with a kind man who seemed to understand parts of me I had forgotten were there. Life, it seemed, had surprises left for me after all. Our second day in Munich dawned with heavy snowfall that transformed the city into a scene from a fairy tale. We visited the Nymphenburg Palace, where Daniel shared historical details that weren't included in the tour guide's spiel. His knowledge was impressive, but never pedantic, offered as shared discoveries rather than lectures. "Do you miss teaching?" I asked as we paused before a particularly beautiful ceiling fresco. He considered the question thoughtfully. "Parts of it. I miss the excitement of watching someone connect with history for the first time. But I don't miss grading papers or department meetings." He glanced at me with curiosity. "Did you work before retirement?" "I was a librarian," I said. "Sis?" realizing how long it had been since anyone had asked about my professional life. "At the university first, then the public library after Mark was born. I loved connecting people with exactly the right book, especially children." "A perfect profession for you," he said with such certainty that I had to laugh. "How would you know that? We've known each other less than 2 days." His smile was warm despite the chilly palace room. "Because you listen more than you speak. You notice details, and you clearly value stories, both telling and hearing them." I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, unused to being observed so closely. After the palace tour, Daniel and I found a cozy cafe for lunch. Over bowls of rich goulash soup, our conversation flowed easily from books to travel to family. I told him about Mark and Hannah, even sharing the hurt of being excluded from their Christmas plans. "That's why you decided to come on this trip? Because they told you to stay home?" Put so bluntly, it sounded both petty and brave. "I suppose so," I admitted. Though I like to think I would have found my courage eventually, even without the push. He reached across the table and briefly touched my hand, a gesture so unexpected that I nearly pulled away. "Sometimes we need the push," he said gently, "the catalyst that forces us to make the change we've been avoiding. Your daughter-in-law may have done you a favor." I laughed at that. "I'm not sure I'm ready to thank her yet." "Give it time," he said with a wink. "By the end of this trip, you might want to send her flowers." After lunch, we wandered through another Christmas market, this one smaller and less touristy than yesterday's. Daniel insisted on buying me a beautiful hand-painted glass ornament, a delicate blue bird that reminded me of the ones that visited my garden in spring. A souvenir of your first real day of freedom, he said as the vendor wrapped it carefully in tissue paper. I started to protest the gift, then stopped myself. Why shouldn't I accept this small kindness from a new friend? Thank you, I said instead. I'll hang it somewhere I can see it every day. That evening, Daniel invited me to dinner the following night in Salzburg, just the two of us. The invitation hung in the air between us, weighted with possibilities. This was more than casual companionship. This was a dinner, just the two of us. A date, though neither of us used the word. For a moment I felt Richard's presence acutely, not as a ghost, but as a part of me, the part that had loved only one man for 40 years. Would accepting dinner with Daniel somehow diminish that love? But then I remembered how Richard had lived, embracing adventure, seeking connection, always choosing joy over fear. What would he want from me now? I'd like that very much, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Daniel's smile was worth any momentary doubt. Wonderful. As I fell asleep that night, I realized I hadn't thought about being alone at Christmas even once that day. Instead, I had been too busy being present in this beautiful city, in new friendships, in the tentative rediscovery of myself. Munich had given me my first steps back into a world bigger than grief, bigger than obligation, bigger than the narrow role I had accepted for too long. And tomorrow would bring Salzburg, Mozart, and a dinner with a man who made me remember what it felt like to be seen. Baby steps, indeed. The journey from Munich to Salzburg took us through a landscape straight from a Christmas card. Rolling hills dusted with snow, small villages with church spires rising above clustered houses, mountains looming in the distance like silent guardians. Daniel and I sat together, occasionally pointing out something particularly beautiful. Did you know, Daniel said after a comfortable silence, that Mozart was only 35 when he died? Imagine what he might have created if he'd lived even a decade longer. I suppose we all leave with unfinished symphonies, I replied thoughtfully. Things we meant to create or experience but never got around to. He nodded. That's why I decided to keep traveling after Elizabeth died. There were so many places on our list that we never reached. I couldn't bear the thought of those experiences remaining unlived. Is that why you're here now? Checking off a place from your list with Elizabeth? He turned to me fully then, his blue eyes serious beneath silver brows. No, Evelyn, I've been to Salzburg with Elizabeth. I'm here now because I've learned that new experiences can be just as valuable as completing old plans. Sometimes more so. The weight of his words made my heart beat a little faster. I looked back toward the window, watching my breath fog the glass like a schoolgirl flustered by attention. I'm glad, I said finally. That you're here now, I mean. His hand found mine briefly, a gentle pressure that was gone almost before I registered it. So am I. Salzburg welcomed us with a light snowfall. Our hotel was in the Old Town, a charming building with centuries of history in its stones. Our local guide led us through narrow streets where Mozart had walked as a child, pointing out landmarks connected to the composer's life. Later, we visited the Salzburg Cathedral, where preparations were underway for the evening's Christmas choir performance. For the remainder of the afternoon, Daniel and I wandered the Christmas markets scattered throughout the Old Town, stopping at stalls selling handcrafted ornaments and sweet treats. At one stall, I purchased small wooden angels for my grandchildren, peace offerings for when I returned home. The restaurant Daniel had chosen for dinner was tucked away on a side street, far from the tourist crowds. Inside, candles flickered on wooden tables, and a small fireplace cast a warm glow across the room. The host greeted Daniel by name, to my surprise. "You've been here before?" I asked as we were seated at a corner table. "Once, years ago," he admitted, "with Elizabeth. I remembered the food being exceptional." I felt an unexpected pang at the thought of sitting where his wife once sat. "We can go somewhere else if you'd prefer," I offered. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Evelyn," he said gently, "I chose this place because I wanted to share something special with you, not because I'm trying to recreate the past. Elizabeth is part of my history, just as Richard is part of yours. But this, right now, is new." His honesty disarmed me completely. I'm still learning how to do this, I admitted. How to honor what was while embracing what could be. We both are, he said, squeezing my hand lightly before releasing it. It's a journey, not a destination. After dinner, we rejoined our group at the cathedral for the choir performance. The ancient church was packed, all drawn by the promise of celestial music in a sacred space. As the choir began to sing, pure voices rising toward the vaulted ceiling, I felt a hush fall over the crowd. When they performed Silent Night, first in German, then in English, something broke open inside me. This hymn, written in Austria and sung throughout the world, had always been Richard's favorite. We had sung it together every Christmas Eve for 40 years. Tears filled my eyes and spilled silently down my cheeks. I wasn't crying from grief, though Richard's absence was certainly part of what I felt. These were tears of recognition, of beauty, of continuity, of being fully present in a moment of transcendence. Daniel's hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers interlacing with my own. He didn't speak or look at me, just offered the simple comfort of human connection as the music washed over us both. When the final note faded into silence before the applause began, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, not to a place or even to the man beside me, but to the great ongoing story of human experience, of love and loss, music and silence, endings and beginnings. Outside, snow was falling more heavily. Daniel and I strolled through the snowy streets, following the sound of distant caroliers. We found them in a small square, local singers performing traditional Austrian Christmas songs for a crowd of appreciative listeners. "Thank you," I said quietly, turning to Daniel. "For dinner, for this, for that." Understanding. "Understanding what?" he asked, his face half illuminated by the lights from the square. "What it feels like to hear Silent Night and think of someone who isn't here anymore. What it means to be creating new memories without forgetting old ones." He studied my face for a moment, his expression tender. "You don't need to thank me for that, Evelyn. It's what two people do when they recognize something in each other. They acknowledge it, respect it, make space for it." We stood there, snow falling around us, caught in a moment of perfect understanding. I wasn't sure which of us moved first, but suddenly his arms were around me, and mine around him. A warm embrace that felt both new and achingly familiar. We didn't kiss. It was too soon for that, and we were both still carrying the shapes of other embraces in our muscle memory. But as we held each other in that snowy square, I felt something that had been frozen inside me for 8 years begin to thaw. Later, my phone buzzed with messages from Mark. I quickly checked his latest text. "Mom, seriously worried now. Please call ASAP." "You should call him," Daniel said. "It's still early afternoon in Colorado." In the hotel lobby, I called Mark, putting the phone on speaker. Mark answered immediately, his voice tense with worry. "Mom! Finally! Where have you been? I've been calling for 2 days." "I'm in Salzburg now," I said calmly. "I told you I was on a Christmas tour. We've been sightseeing." "You could have called." "Hannah and I have been worried sick." I felt a twinge of guilt, quickly followed by a flash of irritation. "You could tell them Grandma is visiting Europe, seeing the Christmas markets, hearing beautiful music. You could tell them I'm having an adventure." Mark was silent for a moment. "Are you doing this to punish us? Because Hannah didn't include you for Christmas?" The question stung because there was a grain of truth in it. "No, Mark," I said finally. "I'm doing this for me. Because I've spent 8 years being Richard's widow and your mother, and I needed to remember I'm also Evelyn." Another silence, longer this time. "You've never done anything like this before. It's not like you." "Maybe it's exactly like me," I replied. "The me I haven't had a chance to be yet." "Are you alone?" he asked finally, concern replacing his earlier frustration. I glanced at Daniel. "No, I'm with a wonderful group. I've made friends. I'm perfectly safe and having a marvelous time." "Well, good. That's good." Mark sounded uncertain but no longer angry. "Will you keep in touch, just so we know you're okay?" "I promise." I'll try to call every couple of days. And Mark, I love you. This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about finding myself again. I love you too, Mom, he said softly. Merry Christmas. That night I took out my phone and on impulse posted a photo Daniel had taken of me that day, standing in front of Salzburg Cathedral with snowflakes in my hair and genuine happiness on my face. Beside it, I wrote, "Sometimes the path forward is found in unexpected places. Spending Christmas in Austria, discovering that joy can be found even when you're not looking for it." I added a second photo, one a kind stranger had taken of Daniel and me at the Christmas market, our heads bent together as we examined hand-carved ornaments, both of us laughing at some shared joke. I posted the photos, set my phone aside, and prepared for bed, unaware that back in Colorado, those simple images were about to cause a small storm of their own. Vienna welcomed us with imperial grandeur. After a morning's drive from Salzburg, we arrived in the Austrian capital as the winter sun broke through clouds, illuminating the city's elegant architecture. This was a place of palaces and coffeehouses, Mozart and Strauss, history layered upon history like the perfect Sachertorte for which the city was famous. Our tour began at Schönbrunn Palace, the Habsburg summer residence now gleaming white against the winter sky. As we wandered through opulent room after room, Daniel stayed close beside me, occasionally whispering historical anecdotes about the emperors and empresses who had lived within these walls. After Schönbrunn, we visited the Spanish riding school and had lunch at a traditional Viennese coffee house where the waiters wore formal attire. Daniel insisted on ordering for us both in surprisingly fluent German. "You must try the Einspänner," he said. "Coffee with whipped cream served in a glass. It's a Viennese specialty." As we savored our meal, I checked my phone and was startled to find dozens of notifications. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues, distant relatives, all commenting on my photos from Salzburg. "Is everything all right?" Daniel asked, noting my expression. "It seems my social media post has caused quite a stir," I said, showing him the screen. Comments ranged from, "Evelyn, you look radiant. Who is this handsome gentleman?" to Mark's terse, "Mom, call me. Who is this guy?" Daniel chuckled, but I noticed a slight tension in his posture. "I hope I haven't caused problems for you." "Not at all," I assured him. "People are just surprised. I've been predictable for a very long time." He was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "There's something I need to tell you, Evelyn. Something I should have mentioned sooner." My heart stuttered, sudden anxiety replacing the warm contentment of moments before. "That sounds ominous." "It's not, I promise." He took a deep breath. "It's about Richard, about how I knew him." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "You knew Richard? My Richard?" Daniel nodded, looking uncomfortable for the first time since we'd met. "Not well, but yes. We met at an academic conference in Chicago in 1985. I was presenting a paper on European migration patterns after World War II. Richard was there representing his university's history department. I struggled to process this information. Richard had indeed attended conferences regularly throughout his career as a history professor, but the coincidence seemed impossible. "Why didn't you say something before?" "I wasn't completely sure it was the same Richard when you first mentioned him," Daniel explained. "But then you mentioned Colorado State University, and I knew." He continued, "We only spoke a few times, but he talked about you, showed me a photo he carried in his wallet. He was so proud of you, of the life you'd built together." The coffeehouse around us faded as I was transported back nearly 40 years, imagining Richard sharing our story with this man who now sat across from me. It felt surreal, as if past and present had collapsed into one another. "When I saw your name on the tour list," Daniel said quietly, "I wondered if it could be the same Evelyn. Then when I saw you at the airport, something about your smile reminded me of that photo he'd shown me. But I didn't want to overwhelm you with such an unlikely coincidence right away." "So all this time," I began, struggling to find the right question among the dozens racing through my mind. "All this time I've been getting to know you as you are now," he said gently. "Not as Richard's Evelyn, but as yourself. That's the truth, I promise." I sat back in my chair, emotions swirling like snow in a blizzard. There was disbelief at such an extraordinary coincidence, confusion about why he hadn't mentioned it sooner, and beneath it all, a strange sense of comfort, as if Richard had somehow reached across time to introduce me to someone who might understand me. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked, the only question that really mattered. His eyes held mine steadily. "Because what's happening between us feels important, and I didn't want there to be secrets. Because you deserve the whole truth before we go any further. And because seeing those photos, reading those comments, it reminded me that life is full of extraordinary connections if we're brave enough to acknowledge them." His honesty disarmed me completely. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "It's overwhelming, but also somehow right, like the universe had a plan all along." The relief in his smile was palpable. "You're not angry?" I shook my head. "How could I be? If anything, it feels like permission. Like Richard would approve of this unlikely friendship." "Friendship," Daniel repeated, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "Is that what we're calling it?" The question hung between us, full of possibility. Before I could answer, Patricia appeared at our table, rounding up stragglers for the afternoon's tour of the Vienna Opera House. Throughout the afternoon, I found myself watching Daniel with new awareness. This wasn't just a charming stranger who had appeared in my life at exactly the right moment. This was someone who had met my husband, who carried a memory of Richard the Frayed had never known existed. By evening, as we gathered for dinner at a traditional Viennese restaurant, I had moved past the initial shock into a strange, peaceful acceptance. Life was full of unexpected connections and surprising turns. Perhaps this was simply one more reminder that my story was more complex and beautiful than I had recognized. During dinner, while the group was distracted by a local musician, Daniel leaned close to my ear. "There's something else I should tell you," he said, his voice low. "I've been following you on social media for years. After I realized who you were, I looked you up. I hope that doesn't sound strange. I just wanted to know how your life had turned out." This revelation was somehow more startling than the first. "You've been watching my life from a distance all this time?" He nodded, looking sheepish. "Not in a creepy way, I promise. Your accounts were public and you didn't post often. When Richard passed away, you mentioned it in a post. I sent a condolence message you probably never saw among all the others." I tried to imagine Daniel observing the glimpses of my life I'd shared online while I remained completely unaware of his existence. "So when you saw my name on the tour list," I began. "I wondered if it might be fate," he finished, "or at least a very fortunate coincidence." The musician had moved to another table, and conversation swelled around us again. I sat in silence, processing this new information. It should have felt intrusive, perhaps even concerning, but instead it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. "Fate or coincidence," I said finally. "I'm glad you're here, Daniel. I'm glad we found each other, whatever the reason." His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "So am I, Evelyn. More than I can say." That night, I posted one more photo before turning in. The Vienna Opera House at night, lights glowing against the darkness. My caption was simple: "Life reveals its magic in unexpected ways. Vienna at Christmas, with a new friend who turns out to be an old connection. Some journeys bring us full circle." As I drifted off to sleep, I wondered what tomorrow would bring, and for the first time in 8 years, I faced that uncertainty not with dread, but with anticipation. Whatever came next, with Daniel, with my family, with this second chapter of my life, I was finally ready to embrace it with an open heart. The journey from Vienna to Innsbruck took us through spectacular alpine landscapes. Snow-covered peaks rising against clear blue skies, valleys dotted with charming villages. I sat beside Daniel, both of us quiet after the revelations of the previous day, a comfortable silence between us. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked as we approached Innsbruck, nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains. I smiled, watching sunlight glint off distant peaks. "I'm just processing everything. The trip, you, the strange ways life connects people. It is strange, isn't it? How thin the line is between chance and fate." "Do you believe in fate?" I asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question carefully. I believe that life presents us with moments of possibility. Whether we recognize them, whether we act on them, that's up to us. Maybe fate is just being awake enough to see the doors when they open. After checking into our hotel, we visited the famous Golden Roof in the heart of the city. Then Daniel suggested we take the funicular up to the Nordkette mountain range for a panoramic view of Innsbruck. It's supposed to be spectacular at sunset, he said, and I'd love the chance to talk more privately. The view from the top took my breath away. Innsbruck spread beneath us, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached, mountains rising in every direction, snow glowing pink and gold in the setting sun. I wanted to explain more, Daniel said after a while, about why I followed your life online all these years. I turned to look at him, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. I've been curious about that. He drew a deep breath. After meeting Richard at that conference, I found myself thinking about you both often. You represented something I was searching for. A partnership of equals. A love based on mutual respect and genuine friendship. My first marriage had ended badly. Elizabeth was my second wife, and when I met her, I was determined to build something better. So I remembered the way Richard talked about you and tried to emulate that in my own relationship. He turned to face me fully. Years later, I looked you both up out of curiosity. From there, it became a habit, checking occasionally to see photos of your garden, your grandchildren. I know it sounds strange. It is a little strange, I agreed without judgment. Though I suppose we're all voyeurs in the social media age. When Richard died, I sent a condolence message, just a brief note saying I had met him once. I doubted you'd remember me among all the others. After Elizabeth passed away, I found myself looking at your posts more often. Seeing how you were navigating life after loss gave me a kind of blueprint when I couldn't see one for myself. The sun had nearly disappeared, the sky deepening to indigo, lights twinkling below us like earthbound stars. When I saw your name on the tour list, it felt like more than coincidence, like the universe was offering a chance I never expected, to thank you for unknowingly helping me through my darkest days. I was silent, absorbing his words. Finally, I asked the question hovering at the edges of my mind. And now? What is this to you now, Daniel? Is it gratitude, curiosity satisfied, or something else? His eyes met mine, steady and clear in the fading light. Now it's about discovering who Evelyn Wilson is today, not just the woman I glimpsed through Richard's stories or social media posts. It's about finding out if this connection between us is as real as it feels. He paused. If you want that too. The honesty of his answer disarmed me completely. No pretense, no hidden agenda, just a man standing before me with his heart open. I do want that, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, even though it terrifies me a little. His smile was gentle. Fear and courage always go hand in hand. Back in Innsbruck's old town, the Christmas market was in full swing, stalls glowing with lights. Carol singers gathered around a towering Christmas tree. At one stall selling delicate glass snowflakes, Daniel selected a particularly beautiful one. For your tree back home, he said, handing it to me. To remember this conversation, this moment. I accepted the gift, touched by the gesture and all it implied, that our connection would continue beyond this trip, that this fragile, beautiful thing between us was worth preserving. That night I called Mark as promised. He seemed calmer now, almost sheepish about his earlier worry. So this guy Daniel, he said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Hannah looked him up online. She says he's legitimate, respected professor, published author. I laughed softly. Did you think I'd fallen for some international con man? No. Well, maybe a little, Mark admitted. It's just so unlike you, Mom. You've never even dated since Dad died. I know, I said. But maybe it's time for me to surprise you, and myself a little. There was a pause. You look happy in those photos. Happier than I've seen you in a long time. I am happy, I said, realizing the truth of it. I'm rediscovering parts of myself I thought were gone. And Daniel, he's part of that discovery. Well, good, Mark said, genuine warmth in his voice. That's good, Mom. Just be careful with your heart, okay? His concern touched me deeply. I will, sweetheart. I promise. Our tour bus crossed into Switzerland the next morning, winding through mountain passes dusted with fresh snow. It was Christmas Eve, a fact that struck me suddenly as we passed through a small village where residents were decorating a large pine tree. Christmas Eve, the night I had spent with family for decades. The night that, just a week ago, I had dreaded spending alone. Our destination was Lucerne, a picturesque city on Lake Lucerne, surrounded by snow-capped mountains. After checking into our hotel, Daniel and I spent the afternoon exploring the old town, crossing the famous Chapel Bridge and browsing shops selling Swiss watches, chocolates, and Christmas ornaments. I need to tell you something, Daniel said as we sat in a cafe watching snowflakes dance outside. Something that might affect whatever this is becoming between us. My heart skipped a beat. That sounds ominous. He reached across the table and took my hand. No, not at all. It's just, I've been planning a move. A permanent one. Oh? I managed, unsure where this was leading. I've decided to sell my Nashville house and move to Colorado permanently. I found a small house in Loveland about 45 minutes from Colorado Springs. The implication hit me then. Colorado Springs, my home, barely an hour away from where he would be living. That's quite a coincidence, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Daniel's smile was warm. Is it? I won't pretend the proximity to you wasn't a factor, Evelyn. After seeing your name on the tour list, after hoping we might connect, I started to wonder if perhaps this could be more than just a holiday friendship. The directness of his admission took my breath away. Daniel, we've known each other less than a week. I know, he acknowledged. And if that's all you want, a pleasant memory of a Christmas adventure, I'll understand completely. But I'd like the chance to see if there could be more. To get to know you properly, back in the real world. I looked down at our joined hands, his larger one covering mine. The prospect was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, a chance to explore this unexpected connection further. When will you move? I asked finally. Mid-January? The Nashville house is already under contract. I nodded slowly. That's very soon. Too soon? He asked, vulnerability in his voice. I don't know, Daniel. This has all happened so quickly. A week ago, I was a woman who had been forgotten at Christmas, taking a desperate leap to avoid being alone. Now I'm sitting in Switzerland with a man who knew my husband, who's followed my life from afar, who's moving to be near me. It's a lot to process. I understand, he said gently. I'm not asking for promises, just openness to possibility. I thought about what that might mean, phone calls, dinners, gradually introducing him to my life. I can be open to possibility, I said finally. But I'll need time, Daniel. Time to be sure this is real and not just holiday magic. His smile brightened. Time is something I'm happy to give, Evelyn. At our age, we've learned the value of patience, haven't we? That evening, my phone rang. A video call from Mark. I answered to find not just Mark, but Hannah and the children crowded around the screen, their living room decorated for Christmas visible in the background. Merry Christmas Eve, Mom, they chorused. Merry Christmas Eve, I replied, delighted to see them all. What a wonderful surprise. We wanted to see you open your gifts, Emma, my 9-year-old granddaughter, explained. Dad says we have to wait until tomorrow to open ours, but you can open yours now because you're special. I laughed. But I don't have any gifts here, sweetheart. Yes, you do, Mark said. Check your email. I found a message from Mark with an attachment, a digital gift certificate for a day at an exclusive spa in Colorado Springs, valid for the coming year. It's from all of us, Hannah said, her voice warmer than I'd heard it in months. For when you get back. We thought you might like some pampering after your adventures. That's incredibly thoughtful, I said, genuinely moved. Thank you all. There's something else, Mark added. We'd like you to come over for New Year's, if you're not too jet-lagged. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I'd love that. Hannah leaned closer to the screen, her expression vulnerable. Evelyn, I want to apologize. For Christmas. for making you feel unwelcome. It was never about not wanting you there. I've been struggling with trying to balance everything. My family, Mark's family, the children's expectations. I took the easy way out. And I hurt you. I'm truly sorry." Her apology, so unexpected and sincere, left me momentarily speechless. Tears began to spill down my cheeks. Tears of relief, of forgiveness, of the profound realization that sometimes absence can heal what presence could not. "Oh, Hannah," I said finally. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." "Are you crying, Grandma?" Liam, my 6-year-old grandson, asked with concern. I wiped my eyes, smiling. "Just a little, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy." After we disconnected, I sat for a moment, absorbing what had happened. Hannah's apology, the invitation for New Year's, the genuine warmth I'd felt. It was as if my absence had created a space for them to recognize what my presence had meant all along. That night at the hotel's Christmas Eve dinner, Daniel raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I raised mine in return, my heart full of gratitude and hope. To new beginnings, and to finding home in unexpected places. The drive from Denver Airport to Colorado Springs gave me time to adjust, to transition from Evelyn the adventurer back to Evelyn the widow, the mother, the grandmother, though perhaps now those roles felt less defining, more like facets of a more complex whole. When I turned onto my street, I was surprised to see lights glowing in my windows. As I pulled into the driveway, the front door opened and Mark stepped out, waving. "Welcome home, Mom," he called, coming to help with my luggage. Inside, I found my house transformed. The Christmas tree I had left dark now twinkled with lights. Fresh pine garlands adorned the mantel, and a fire crackled in the fireplace. The scent of cinnamon and baking filled the air. "What is all this?" I asked, overwhelmed by the unexpected welcome. "Hannah's idea," Mark explained. "She wanted to make sure you didn't come home to an empty house." Before I could respond, Emma and Liam burst from the kitchen, flour dusting their clothes, faces alight with excitement. "Grandma!" they cried in unison, rushing to hug me. I knelt to embrace them, breathing in their sweet scents, my heart full to bursting. Behind them came Hannah, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile tentative but genuine. "Welcome home, Evelyn. We thought you might like a proper homecoming." I stood, still holding my grandchildren's hands. "This is wonderful. Thank you." We sat around my dining table, once empty but now filled with family and laughter as I shared stories of my European adventure. "And this Daniel?" Hannah asked as we lingered over coffee. "Will we get to meet him?" The question was asked without judgment, just genuine interest. I glanced at Mark, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, I think you will," I said carefully. "He's moving to Loveland next month. We've made a connection I'd like to explore further." "Good," Hannah said simply. "You deserve happiness, Evelyn, whatever form it takes." Later, after they had gone home with promises of seeing me for New Year's, I stood in my living room, absorbing the familiar surroundings now transformed by my changed perspective. Everything was the same. The photographs on the walls, Richard's reading glasses still on his nightstand. Yet everything felt different because I was different. I unpacked slowly, placing souvenirs carefully around the house. The blue glass bird from Munich on a bookshelf, the wooden angels for the grandchildren under the tree, the snow globe from Salzburg on the mantel. In my bedroom, I took out the silver locket Daniel had given me and placed it on my dresser beside the jewelry box that held my wedding ring. The two pieces side by side seemed symbolic somehow, not competing but complementary, different chapters of the same life. My phone pinged with a message from Daniel. "Home safe? Already missing the Christmas markets and our conversations." I smiled, typing back, "Safe and surprisingly welcomed by family. Missing Europe, but grateful for memories made. And yes, our conversations most of all." His reply came quickly. "Dinner next Friday? I know a place with excellent Sasha torte." "It's a date," I responded, the phrase both casual and significant. That night, as I lay in my own bed, I thought about how far I had traveled, not just in miles, but in spirit. I had left Colorado as Richard's widow, defined by loss and the roles I played in others' lives. I returned as Evelyn, a woman who had found her courage, rediscovered her capacity for joy, and opened herself to whatever might come next. Snow fell softly outside my window as I made final preparations for Christmas dinner. The house was filled with the scent of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and pine. Music played softly from the stereo. Not the classical pieces Richard had favored, but a mixture of traditional carols and contemporary holiday songs that reflected my evolving tastes. In the living room, a 7-foot blue spruce glittered with lights and ornaments, some dating back to my childhood, others from my years with Richard, still others newly acquired during the past year. Near the top hung the blue glass bird from Munich and the delicate snowflake from Innsbruck, reminders of the journey that had changed everything. The dining table was set for 8, places for Mark, Hannah, and the children, for Daniel, for his daughter Melissa, who was visiting from Denver, and for me. The good china was out, along with crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts decades ago, now repurposed for a gathering I could never have imagined last Christmas. The past year had transformed my life in ways I could never have predicted when Hannah told me to stay home last Christmas. Daniel and I had built a relationship slowly but steadily, taking time to know each other outside the enchanted bubble of our European adventure. In February, he had moved to his home in Loveland as planned. We established a rhythm, dinner once or twice a week, sometimes at restaurants halfway between our homes, sometimes at my house, where I rediscovered my love of cooking for someone who appreciated it. In March, I had introduced Daniel to Mark, Hannah, and the children. The evening went better than I could have hoped. Daniel arrived with thoughtful gifts, books for the children selected with knowledge of their interests, a bottle of excellent wine for the adults. By the end of the night, even Mark had relaxed, pulling me aside as Daniel helped Hannah clear the table. "He's good for you, Mom," he said quietly. "I can see it in the way you laugh with him." "He is," I agreed, "but I'm taking it slowly. We both are." "Good," Mark nodded. "But don't take it too slowly. Life's shorter than we like to admit." In April, I had traveled to Nashville with Daniel to help him finalize the sale of his house and meet his daughters. Melissa and Rachel welcomed me with genuine warmth, sharing stories of their father's life with Elizabeth and asking thoughtful questions about mine with Richard. "We worried about him after Mom died," Melissa confided. "He seemed to retreat into his books. It's wonderful to see him engaged with life again." "Your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman," I said, wanting to acknowledge Elizabeth's importance. "She was," Melissa agreed, "and she would have approved of you completely. She always told Dad that if anything happened to her, she didn't want him spending the rest of his life alone." The conversation removed a layer of uncertainty I hadn't fully acknowledged. I wasn't replacing Elizabeth. I was writing a new chapter alongside the cherished ones that had come before. Throughout the year, Hannah and I had built a new relationship based on honest communication rather than polite distance. In July, we had used the spa gift certificate together, spending a day in conversation and relaxation. "I'm really happy for you and Daniel," she had said. "You deserve this, Evelyn. A second chapter." "Thank you," I replied, touched by her sincerity. "That means a lot, especially from you." Now, as Christmas approached again, Daniel and I had decided to host both our families together, a blending of worlds that felt right and natural after a year of building bridges between our separate lives. The doorbell rang. Daniel stood there, arms full of wrapped packages, snowflakes catching in his silver hair. "Merry Christmas, Evelyn," he said, his smile warming me more than the fire crackling in the hearth. Soon the house was filled with the happy chaos of arrival. Children exclaiming over the tree, adults exchanging hugs and holiday wishes, packages being added to the collection under the branches. Melissa arrived shortly after, bringing a homemade pecan pie and her vivacious energy. Watching our families interact, Mark drawing Melissa into a conversation about her work as an architect, Hannah helping her arrange the pie on the dessert table, the children showing her their favorite ornaments on the tree, filled me with quiet joy. Dinner was a lively affair, the table full of conversation and laughter. Daniel carved the turkey with ceremonial precision, just as Richard once had. Mark opened wine with the corkscrew his father had given him on his 21st birthday. Hannah used my mother's gravy boat. Traditions continued, adapted to include new participants, but honoring what had come before. After the meal, we gathered in the living room for the exchange of gifts. When the flurry of unwrapping had subsided, Daniel handed me a small package wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a book, not a new one, but an antique volume of poetry, its leather binding worn soft with age. I opened it to find an inscription. To Evelyn, who taught me that life's most beautiful chapters can begin at any page. With love, Daniel. The simplicity and depth of the gesture brought tears to my eyes. It's perfect, I whispered. Thank you. I had a special gift for him as well. A custom-made calendar for the coming year, each month featuring a photograph from our travels together, with space to note future adventures. For planning our next chapters, I explained as he turned the pages, smiling at the memories captured there. Later, as evening settled around us, Daniel found me in the kitchen, where I was making fresh coffee for dessert. Happy? He asked, slipping an arm around my waist. I leaned against him, taking in the scene through the doorway. Our families together, my home full of life and laughter. Very, I replied. It's everything I didn't know I wanted last year. He chuckled softly. When your daughter-in-law told you to stay home, she had no idea what she was setting in motion. No, I agreed with a smile. But in a way, I'm grateful. Without that moment, I might never have found the courage to take that trip, to find you, to rediscover myself. The universe works in mysterious ways, Daniel said, pressing a kiss to my temple. Grandma, Emma called from her place by the tree. Tell us again about the Christmas markets in Europe, and how you met Daniel. I settled onto the sofa, Daniel beside me, and began the story that had become something of a family legend. Well, it all began when I decided that instead of staying home alone for Christmas, I would give myself the gift of adventure. Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and beautiful. Inside, surrounded by the family I had known and the family I was discovering, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Sometimes, I told Liam when he asked if I would have met Daniel without Hannah telling me to stay home, the things that hurt us most can lead us to the greatest joy if we're brave enough to choose a different path. Later, after everyone had gone, Daniel and I stood in my kitchen, washing the last of the dishes together. What are you thinking? He asked, noting my reflective expression. I'm thinking about how life surprises us. A year ago, I was dreading Christmas, feeling forgotten and unimportant. Now look at all this. I gestured around us. It's more than I ever imagined possible. Daniel set down his dish towel and took both my hands in his. Evelyn Wilson, you are neither forgotten nor unimportant. You are essential to more lives than you know, to your families, to mine, and especially to me. As we stood there in my kitchen on Christmas night, I felt the truth of his words settle deep in my heart. The journey that had begun in hurt and loneliness had led me here, to a life richer and fuller than I had believed possible, to a love I had never expected to find again. Outside, Colorado snow fell softly, each flake finding its perfect place in the winter landscape. Inside, in the home I had once feared would remain empty, I had found not just companionship, but a new sense of self, stronger, braver, more open to the possibilities that life continued to offer, even in its later chapters. Sometimes the greatest journeys are the ones that bring us full circle, not back to where we started, but to where we were always meant to be.